So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you've been a fan of rum over the last 5 years, it's nearly impossible that you've not encountered something from the Foursquare Rum Distillery, and likely something from the Exceptional Cask Selections line in particular. And while this is not an exhaustive collection here, I am extremely fortunate to have as many of these as I do. Now, if you've not been a fan of rum because perhaps, oh no, rum is made from sugarcane and it's always too sweet, I've got a big newsflash for you. Rum is not always too sweet. In fact, many of the rums you may have encountered in the past have been sweetened on purpose. All of these rums in front of me, no flavoring, no added sweeteners. So today, I wanted to cover a very brief summary of what this line has been and how it's evolved over the last 11 years, starting with the first release that was imported here in the United States, which was Mark II, the Port Cask Finish. Now, ironically, finish is a total misnomer here. Really, this is a double maturation. Now, a finish, in my opinion, is usually something that is anywhere from 6 months up to maybe about a year in a secondary cask type. So for example, this rum would be distilled, then filled into ex-bourbon barrels to begin maturing, and then it would be transferred into another barrel type for 6 months or 12 months, and that would be a finish. Ironically though, this was 3 years in ex-bourbon and then 6 years in an ex-ruby port cask. Those port casks, you could argue, were far more than a finish. It's really more of just like a bourbon, ex-bourbon start. So hence why we would call this a double maturation. This was bottled in June of 2014, and this was the first release here in the United States. It was bottled at 40% ABV or 80 proof. This is, to date, the lowest proof bottling that has ever come out of this line, which is really exciting. This also used to sell anywhere from $34.99 up to $39.99. Also, 9 years of age, and one of the first kind of blends in this line. This was like an eye-opening rum for me. Completely changed the way that I perceived the category of rum and what could be done in it. But now, in comparison to some of these newer releases, this is light, this is very delicate. It's almost like these are just really big and intense, and these guys are just way more subtle. It's a different character all around. This is where we began, and if you'll notice, this was also a very different bottle shape in comparison to where we are now. This is one of the most recent releases, Magisterium, which is Mark XXVI. So we're going from Mark II to Mark XXVI. So this is the second release in the whole line, and this is the 26th. The first release was vintage 1998, which many of the rum nerds out there will know was released basically just in Barbados and a little bit in the UK. I believe some in Italy as well, and I'm sure there's someone on the internet that knows far better than I do, so please feel free to correct me here. But that original bottle type, right, for Mark II, this was a US package, 50 ml, and it had this wax over the seal, which was a screw top back then too. So all these things that over time have evolved, have changed, and little elements, not just to raise the profile of the product, but the profile of the package to also match the increased kind of intensity, character, and profile of the line itself. Now, Foursquare has been named Rum Producer of the Year a litany of years. So many so, like it was, at one point it was 7 out of the last 7 years. It might be 8 out of the last 8 years now at the International Spirits Challenge. And it's something like 4 out of the last 6 years in the International Wine and Spirits Competition. Global, blind, juried competitions. The ISC is judged predominantly by experts of the category, so you're looking at rum category experts judging the rums, whereas the IWSC is judged by generalists that are still spirits professionals. So you're looking at journalists, distillers, others that are just well educated on the category of spirits as a whole. So to be named Rum Producer of the Year in both of these global, really well adjudicated competitions is a really big deal. And these have largely been the rums that have helped to win those accolades. Now, every single one of these, as I mentioned, this is Mark XXVI, so this is the 26th release in this line. Each has a unique name, each has a unique kind of color, a unique identifier, and all are different blends between double retort pot still and twin column coffee still. So the double retort still being a Caribbean invention, basically having two doublers or two thumpers, which allow for additional reflux and distillation. Those two doublers or retorts essentially are allowing for further kind of fine cuts and refinement of the distillate so they can really hone in exactly the flavor profile that they want. Now, the twin column coffee still is based upon a 19th century design by an Irishman named Aeneas Coffey. Now, that still, interestingly, also operates under vacuum. And by altering the vacuum or the atmospheric pressure, you are also altering the temperature at which you are able to distill. And each of those stills are going to produce very different styles of rum. Each could be adjusted to produce similar styles of rum. So Richard could attenuate his pot still to produce lighter rums, and it could attenuate his column still to produce heavier rums, depending upon where or when he is taking his cuts. That being said, the blends of those two stills together is what starts to create the profile of Foursquare. You then put different combinations of different blends of stills into different types of barrel, and you let it sit in Barbados for its lifetime to mature. Barbados, which has one of the most unique maturation climates of anywhere, even in the Caribbean, which is looking at essentially 80 degrees Fahrenheit and 80% humidity about 11 months out of the year, with little to no day to night temperature shift, or what's called diurnal shift. High temperature, high humidity means that your evaporation rates on the island are extremely high because you are evaporating both water and alcohol in equivalent volume. And as those things evaporate together, you are concentrating flavor in these barrels. Those evaporation rates are so high that they will often blend down different batches of rums every 3 years, honing it and shaping it over its lifetime to become the final rum that goes into the bottle. And so when we're looking at something here like Magisterium, Magisterium is a blend of both ex-bourbon and ex-sherry barrels that state 16 years of age. That means over a 16-year lifespan, these rums were basically blended down approximately every 3 years. That's an approximation, it's not exact record, but about every 3 years or so to start marrying together the flavor and character. So this product that wound up in the final bottle has taken a life cycle of 16 years with careful change and shifting along its way to be what it is today. And largely, that meticulous kind of like handheld craft of blending, of maturation, is what has led Foursquare to develop the amount of character and flavor and profile in some of these different bottlings. So again, we have this kind of the original bottle shape moving on to the newer bottle design that now has the beautiful necker that has this illustration of the actual chimney from Foursquare, which is basically used on all of their materials. You'll also see that chimney on site at the distillery itself. And then you'll also notice on some of the newer bottles, the logo here above Foursquare now shows a windmill. Because at one point, Barbados had one of the highest concentrations of windmills outside of Holland, outside of the Dutch colonies, largely because those windmills were powering many of their sugar mills that were helping to feed the sugar industry. Now, much of Barbados has actually shrunk as far as the sugar and rum industry is concerned. At one point, Barbados had over 100 different distilleries on the island. That is now reduced to only 4, and only 2 of those distilleries are owned by Barbadian peoples. Now, the Foursquare Rum Distillery is actually newer in the world of rum production, in that the family name, R.L. Seal & Company, has been around since 1926, but the distillery itself wasn't built until 70 years later, in 1996. The original company founded by Reginald Leon Seal, who is Richard Seal's great-great-grandfather. Now, blending is what they have known for 4 generations, where they have really cut their teeth. And so when you look at this process of long maturation and tropical maturation, and then blending and honing over a life cycle of, again, 16, 18 years for some of these releases, it makes sense where that blending practice really comes from. Some of the latest releases, for example, Mark XXVII, Equidem, 14-year double maturation, single blended rum, 5 years in ex-bourbon barrel, and then 9 years in ex-black muscat cask. So this, in my opinion, is one of the craziest and most different exceptional casks I've had of the line, and one of my favorites as a standout in the line since perhaps Criterion. Criterion, which was the first time that I ever got to taste something that was ex-bourbon and ex-Madeira cask. And I love Madeira and love anytime you're going to finish something in a Madeira cask. Equidem in particular, though, has been one of my absolute favorites since Criterion. Really interesting and complex while still retaining much of the fingerprint of the Foursquare Rum Distillery, which I think is also really important because you always want to know that there is a level of quality there. And I think that's what you get. Like, I think part of that profile of Foursquare is due to the processes that make it high quality. It's not about these broad swings in flavor from end to end. This really is about the art of the blend between those two still types and then unique barrel types. That's the story here, right? It's all distilled from molasses. It's always a blend of those two types of stills. It's tropically matured and then unique blends there. I think that there's more of the story to be told soon because I also know that Richard is crushing fresh cane, none of which has been in this line. Richard also now has one of the world's only vacuum pot stills. It is the world's only vacuum double retort pot still. And we've not tasted a single product from it yet. We've also not tasted almost anything that is coming from rechar barrels, where he has been shaving out the interior, exposing fresh wood, and then recharring. And to me, this next evolution of what's going to come from Foursquare is extremely exciting because this, in my opinion, represents a very complete story. There's a beginning, there's a clear middle. I'm not sure where the end is yet, but I can see a little bit of where it's heading based upon some of these more recent flavor profiles that are coming out. And I think that that is an arc. And I think at the end of that arc, there is going to be a unique kind of next chapter, next phase, next story to be told. An arc, right? There's a great arc. I did this before when I did the tasting of Covenant, like an arc of the Covenant. I just have to revisit it. So color coding, one other thing I wanted to cover here. You'll notice that there is some consistency. As the importer of these, I don't know that we have ever had an exact discussion with Richard about the color code system. My favorite thing is watching it naturally be figured out by the rum community. And they're largely correct, which is super cool. So early on, anything with a red label, and meaning where the font, right? So port cask finish or indelible, where it was written in this red, almost maroon kind of color, these were double maturations, usually at a lower ABV, and as such, usually also at a lower price. So a little bit more affordable, accessible. We'll say those were entries into the whole line. You then got into some of the more complex ones. Criterion, which I mentioned earlier, that was a green label. I don't have a bottle of Criterion in front of me, largely because it is so rare and hard to find. Here's another one, more recent line, Equipoise, which is also a double maturation, but it's at cask strength. So these green labels were always representative of these double maturation approaches at cask strength. We then would get into the vintages, right? So here's 2010, 2004. This was the first vintage released in the United States. Here's 2005. You'll kind of see that blue. The vintage is always a 12-year ex-bourbon barrel at cask strength, but they are wildly different year after year. And one of the most fun experiences for me is getting to taste multiple vintages side by side because they are so different. And yes, they're 12 years in ex-bourbon barrel, and yes, they're all tropically matured, and they're these blends between same double retort and twin column coffee, but they are so distinct and different, which to me is the art of the blend too. So always blue, and then you get into the purples. The purples are fun because this is anything that is older than 12 years of age and also ex-bourbon barrel. So here, Nobiliary, this was a really fun one, 14 years of age. There was another, Shibboleth, was also one that I was personally a huge fan of. I bought personally way too many bottles of it, and I've got it also kind of in the vault, so to speak. It is a unique way of expressing how, even though this is long-aged in the tropics, they are still retaining so much bright, punchy flavor and character. There's good acidity, there's good fruit note. It's not over-oaked, even though this thing has been maturing 14 years in the tropics. also a cask strength, right? So that's kind of the evolution of the blues into the purples. So now suddenly we've got foil blue, which is a blend. This one in particular, it's a blend of, I believe, 3 rums that are some double maturations, some single maturations, and it's just such a different kind of approach. And the end profile, in my opinion, is so much more broad and complex. I know there are folks out there that have tasted some of these recent releases. They're like, they all taste the same to me. But from an olfactory nerd's perspective, somebody who loves these subtle, nuanced differences and is fortunate enough to taste these side by side, it is one of the coolest things ever. And these are some of the most expressive and unique distillates I've ever had. Not just rums, but spirits. Incredible, big, punchy flavor. By the way, another favorite, Redoutable. This was named Best Spirit of the Year, not just Best Rum, but Best Spirit of the Year, which I believe was only the second time ever for the category of rum for that to happen in the International Spirits Challenge, which is bonkers. But this was a blend of 2 different 14-year rums. One was 14 years ex-bourbon, the other was 14 years ex-Madeira cask. So not surprised that I loved this one too, and just stoked that other people also loved it. Representing this line of rums has been one of the coolest things I've had the opportunity to do, and anytime I've been fortunate enough to meet someone with the same level of geek about these rums has been an amazing and deeply rewarding experience. And I will tell you, I don't know if there is anybody geekier about these rums than Richard Seale himself. Getting to know Richard, getting to sit down and hear his passion, not just for his rums, for Barbados rum, for the category of rum, for the Caribbean diaspora and its peoples, and just what's going on in the Caribbean right now, has been a really eye-opening and perception-shifting experience. And I am so immensely grateful. And it's just made that much better because, holy crap, I've got delicious rum to enjoy. So again, if you've been a fan of rum in the last 5 years or so, you've definitely encountered this line. I hope that this way too long video added some tiny shim of information that you didn't have before. If you're not a fan of rum because you think rums are not complex enough, or they're too sweet, or they're just not a connoisseur level spirit, I would challenge you all day long on that. But ultimately, I would love to help try and change your perception on that, because rum absolutely is a category to be held to the highest of standards. And it is incredible once you start to dive into it and start peeling back the layers of the onion. Cheers.